it's a really good time to be learning. And I think fortunately in construction, especially at a small scale where there's relatively not that much at risk, you can find a good plumber, you can find a good electrician and HVAC. There's a lot of very capable people that are highly qualified to do the work, and you can get a lot done not knowing that much yourself. But, a lot of painful lessons along the way too.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further. Welcome back to another episode of Weiss Advice. I am your host, Yonah Weiss. Great to be here today with another amazing guest, John Blatchford. Great to have you on the show. How you doing?
Great. Thanks, Yonah. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, it's great to meet new people. And we actually have had a few people recently from the Twitterverse, I guess we call it, right? Who have come into my life over these past few months. And it's been amazing to meet so many amazing real estate entrepreneurs, real estate investors who are active on Twitter and sharing tremendous amounts of value and content. So for our listeners who aren't yet checking out the retweet community, check it out. There are amazing people like John and many others who we've had on the show. But John, why don't you give our listeners who may not, be so familiar with who you are, what you do, give us a little background, what you do, how you got started in real estate.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I guess we're all, grateful for Twitter and the connections it's provided. So yeah, I'm from upstate New York originally, near Albany in a city called Amsterdam, New York. And I went to school in Southwest New York at Binghamton. I got an engineering degree. Then went to grad school at the University of Cincinnati for an MBA. And then I didn't really expect to stay there. I thought I'd be there 2 years, go to grad school, enjoy that experience. But I kind of fell in love with the place and, got a job out of grad school and stayed. So I worked for a small software company for a few years and basically bought a building on the side. I was always sort of interested in architecture and design, history, preservation, real estate without really knowing what that meant. And, there's an opportunity to buy a building and bought it and then foolishly quit my job and started my company Kunst in 2015.
That's pretty cool. Listen, a lot of people get started in real estate almost by accident. And I think what you've done and I think what you've accomplished over the past 8 years, I guess, since you founded the Kunst company is just amazing. Tell us about some of the projects. I know you're focused pretty heavily in Cincinnati, which is an amazing market. It's a growing market, Ohio in general, but Cincinnati is one of those markets that has been growing, is continuing to grow. And you're doing a lot of like redevelopment projects, right? Opportunity zones and things where you're dealing with historic kind of redevelopments, correct?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, with no real grand plan at the beginning, just bought a building that was built in the 1870s, hadn't been lived in for 40 years. Like a lot of cities certainly in the Midwest and throughout the US had kind of been vacated from the, 50s onwards. And by 2000 was sort of the low point, economically, population and everything else. So, this revitalization started in Cincinnati in the specific neighborhood called Over the Rhine around, 2000, 2010, it really picked up. So we were kind of in the middle of that, or we have been in the middle of it. And yeah, that's been the model, basically buy buildings that are very old. They're, pretty much in terrible condition, but trying to restore them back to their original glory, but using a lot of like tax incentives, opportunity zone, historic tax credits primarily. And then there's a local property tax abatement program as well. So I'd say those three together are sort of what we've done a lot of.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about that, because I know we've talked about it on the show before, but for our listeners who may not be familiar so much with the historic property tax credits. Now you have to go in and you have to preserve certain components of the facade or of the building to make it, they want to preserve some sort of semblance of the feel of the neighborhoods that obviously these kind of older neighborhoods where, properties were built in the 1800s or what have you. They want to restore that. So what does that mean? They're giving you credits to kind of restore these properties?
Yeah, so the program has been around for 50, 60 years. And it was, I think, in response to, a general trend in the US of let's tear everything down, let's put in highways, let's put in malls, let's build parking lots. It was very car centric. And, there's good things that could come from that. But I think, went pretty extreme, created cityscapes and environments that people weren't really that excited about. and certainly, I imagine Israel or, other historic cities around the world. Yeah, there's a value in preserving our historic buildings and our culture and all that. So the program, I think, really was born out of that. Okay, as Americans, we do need to preserve some, although we are capitalists and want to, always kind of be improving. So I think that's really the intent of the program. We're going to financially incentivize a very high level of historic preservation. So in addition to sort of whatever local controls there might be, you probably can't tear the building down. These tax credits will additionally incentivize keeping the original windows, the original doors, the flooring, a lot of stuff on the interior that otherwise would not be governed by or, controlled by the government. But for that, you can get a 45% discount on your construction, basically, in the way of a tax credit. And then, there are ways to basically pay less tax or to sell it to someone who can pay less tax. So yeah, basically a financial incentive on roughly 45% of your construction costs to do a high level of historic preservation.
And in doing, I'm just curious, because it would seem like obviously they're doing this huge discount to restore or to renovate the property, but having to do it in that way as opposed to doing it however you wanted to do it, does it end up being more expensive and then you're getting it discounted, but anyways, it's running more expensive because you have to use these certain windows or restore the flooring instead of just replacing it or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think for the level, like the type of work that I'm interested in that we would do anyways, we're going to put in an aluminum clad window. We're going to probably use solid wood doors. We would do that even if there was no tax incentive. And so it ends up being, I think, about the same. Like the tax credits don't really, I would say, change our plan that much, frankly. They're annoying. You have to get it all approved. You have to apply. That exists, but it's not like we would do that much differently. But yeah, compared to like a new build or compared to if you want to do all vinyl and hollow doors and put in vinyl flooring, like if you did the cheapest version, like this would definitely be more expensive. But yeah, so I think it nets out that with the tax credit, like it would be less expensive than what we would do otherwise by a lot. But it's more, the time and annoyance required is the question of if it's worth it.
Right. I mean, I'm sure there's red tape. If you have to apply to receive that credit, there's obviously time involved there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you can't start construction until it's approved. In Ohio, you can only apply twice a year. So really the timing of it, but hopefully you can sync it all up. You have to get permits, you have to get your loan, and all that, takes time anyways. So if you can time it all together, it probably also doesn't slow the project down that much, but potentially it can. And that's probably the main consideration if it's worth the time.
Very interesting. That's pretty amazing. And so, I mean, it sounds like you kind of fell into this, bought a property almost by accident and, developed it, worked on the skills. Did you have any of these skills in terms of the construction, in terms of acquisitions, anything like that prior to that? Or was really just learning everything on the fly?
Yeah. So, I was a project manager. I studied business. I'd taken accounting classes. I think there was some aspects of this that I was maybe trained for as a 25-year-old. But certainly not the construction, real estate in general, tax credits, preservation. I mean, all that stuff was new and sort of trial by fire. We had basically a friend of mine who's a general contractor. He helped a bit on the construction to start out. And then beyond that, it was, YouTube and everything else.
And there's no problem with that. I mean, you can learn a tremendous amount from that, right?
Yeah.
There are great people out there sharing what they've done, their experiences.
Yeah, it's a really good time to be learning. And I think fortunately in construction, especially at a small scale where there's relatively not that much at risk, you can find a good plumber, you can find a good electrician and HVAC, there's a lot of very capable people that are highly qualified to do the work, and you can get a lot done not knowing that much yourself, but a lot of painful lessons along the way too.
Sure. So you're living in New York City. Why Cincinnati of all places?
Yeah, again, I think just because I was there, but yeah, I recommend it certainly as a place to live. I mean, at least as a place to visit and spend a long weekend or whatever. It's, I've been, I'd say all around the world. I've been a lot of places in this country, maybe more than most. And I think Cincinnati is like one of the most compelling places on earth, and certainly relative to the cost to live there and everything else. But yeah, I think it's a cool place. It's very well preserved. It's this huge historic district that only in the last 10 years has sort of been brought back to life, as I mentioned. And I think there's still a lot of opportunity there. And yeah, I think a rare place, whereas like a 25-year-old, I was a developer. I was able to buy buildings and, be in the game where, it's not true a lot of places. So yeah, I definitely advocate it as a place to visit, to potentially live, and certainly a place to do real estate development.
That's amazing. And so what you're focused on, right, in this neighborhood you mentioned is called the Over the Rhine neighborhood. Yeah. Is that, it's like a specific neighborhood within Cincinnati?
Yeah, and it's right next to downtown. So the old joke was there used to be the Miami-Erie Canal running through basically separating downtown from this neighborhood. and all the Germans lived in this neighborhood. And so you had to go over the Rhine River to get to them. But it's basically the same as downtown. It's, it's just like once you go from 8th Street to 9th Street, you enter over the Rhine.
Gotcha. And you're using also another strategy, which is just incredible. I'd love for you to share a little more about opportunity zones, because this is something that gets overlooked by many investors. It's relatively new. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act came out with this back in 2017. This opportunity zone incentive for people to invest in and redevelop specific zones or neighborhoods, if you will. And tell us how that actually works and maybe what you specifically, do with that.
Yeah. So, you on the tax side can probably, explain a lot of it better than I could, but yeah, basically an incentive, a way for the government, again, to incentivize investment into maybe historically like places where there hasn't been a lot of investment. So yeah, there's specific geographic areas in Cincinnati. It's basically all over the Rhine, this neighborhood we develop in, and then certain parts of downtown, there's random streets. How did those get drawn up? It's
right.
all political, whatever. But,
I know, right?
Yeah. But anyway, so the neighborhood we were already developing in is basically an entire opportunity zone. And so by investing qualified capital gains, on behalf of our investors, they're able not to pay capital gains tax, at the time of investing. And then, if we hold these properties for 10 years, it's a step up in basics. Basically, they're not going to pay capital gains tax on the gain of that investment. So, not paying the tax now is, effectively investing maybe free money, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And then not paying that capital gains tax on the gain of the property in 10 or 11 years is potentially a very big win. So again, it's like, okay, that you're required to hold a building for 10 years. It's very specific ways of how the money has to flow, into the entity, into the property, all that, which makes it very annoying and potentially quite painful, but the tax benefit is massive. So yeah, we've been pretty exclusively investing in opportunity zone projects since 2019.
Very cool. And so obviously you haven't seen the back end of it yet because it's too soon to sell, but you actually need to, I think there's certain like threshold requirements of the amount of money you need to reinvest into the specific property equal to or greater than the basis of the property. So that can be a little bit complicated if you're not totally, tearing down a building and building from ground up, right?
Yeah, and it actually is the same requirement for the historic tax credits.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so for us, it's like we would already do that. Again, I think smarter people are probably just doing value add, and it's more of a gray line. But we're going through the full pain and doing like a gut renovation, and the basis to buy the buildings is so low, or at least it's getting higher. But it started at 5,000, then 300,000, and now maybe 500,000 or something, or maybe $1 million to buy a vacant building. But, the basis relative to the construction is very low.
That makes sense because obviously the vacant properties and, obviously you're helping with others as well to help increase the value of the properties in this neighborhood. But as time goes on, it will be harder and harder probably to do an opportunity zone investment where you're having to buy a property at a higher basis because the property value may have just, even if it's vacant and even if it's torn down, but nevertheless, it's still an amazing incentive. And I think the strategy behind it, think about it like this, like very few people would go into like a vacant rundown property and be willing to shell out a huge amount of money, if not for the tax incentives that came along with it. So, it does make a lot of sense from the municipality, from the tax collector's standpoint.
Yeah, I think so. And, I believe it's the proper like government intervention where you have to get the project done. You have to hold it for a period of time. You have to invest tons of private capital. You have to get the debt and personally guarantee that, all these things. And then there'll just be a sort of reward on the back end. I think it's better than, punitive rules where you can't touch a historic building. The government's going to regulate everything done with historic buildings. I think that would be incorrect. Or like, trying to provide the money up front or all these other ways. But anyways, I think that you have to basically do all the work first, and then you'll get this sort of public incentive. Seems like the right way to get a good result.
Very cool. And you've done about 40 or so projects to date, correct?
Yeah, all in probably 4 zip codes.
That's pretty cool. So, obviously you get to know, you have a whole team, you have a property management, you have a whole team that's vertically integrated basically to help build these buildings or redevelop them, I guess, rent them out.
Yeah, and a very localized now, localized focus. Yeah, as far as a team, like figured out over time, one of the many mistakes of, what do you do in-house? What do you do third party? Yeah, it's tough to build all these businesses at once. And property management is a different business than construction and development. So, we figured that out over time, but yeah, just kind of been a focus for the last 8 years.
And do you have any other strategies going on in the future, or are you just going to continue to double down in what you've been good at until now?
Yeah, so we have a few projects to finish right now, and then I don't know what the world looks like, what the real estate world looks like, interest rates, all that. So yeah, I'm not sure what we're going to be doing in terms of buying the rest of this year and into next year. But yeah, I think there's still opportunity, certainly in over the Rhine, and even in downtown Cincinnati where the scale is larger, and there's opportunities there as well. Yeah.
Now, are you partnering with other people to do these projects, or is it just solely you and your team?
Yeah, just our team. We haven't done any sort of partnerships or joint ventures, anything. We've worked with maybe 50 investors since we started. And yeah, hiring a lot of the third-party work, architects, engineers, and subcontractors. But yeah, we haven't done any sort of like joint ventures or partnerships, which I'm not sure if that was been the right thing or not.
Sometimes you never know until you try, until you make mistakes or you learn from them or you get lucky or you get successful. And you never know. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about putting your head down and focusing on what you're doing and kind of doubling down at what you seem to be good at. And hopefully you're making money doing this. So that's obviously a plus. I mean, if you're living in New York City, you have to be because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to live there based on the expenses.
Yeah.
That's amazing. If you had to pick like one project that was just like whatever could go wrong, like went wrong. I mean, do you have any stories like that where you just had certain things go wrong with the project?
So yeah, on one side, it's good that we're just doing complete gut renovations. It's sort of like, we're not going to be surprised if the electric doesn't work or the boiler goes out. So it's like, that doesn't even exist. We just
tear it out.
We just tear it out. Everything's new. But yeah, I would say, the most surprises come probably on the structural side, getting into replacing foundations and rebuilding masonry walls. So yeah, I don't know that one's worse than the next. I think it's a similar challenge of, making them secure, first of all, structurally, and new roof, masonry, all that.
Yeah.
And then, just the process of, financing and personal guarantees and all that. But yeah, I mean, one good one is we bought a building up in the hillside. We go up to the attic in one of the early days of owning it and just see this huge white bird, and I shriek, and it ended up being, there were turkey vultures.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, which are federally protected. And so that was a fun one. We had to try
and pretty scary to note.
Yeah, and they're huge. So that was a good one. So basically, how do you peacefully get them out of the building without harming them? So
did they have any rights, like to be like animal rights?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Migratory Bird Act, where this type of bird is like a federally protected, it would be like a federal crime, I think, to kill them. Not that I would anyways, but
but you could legally evict them, though, you're saying.
I think you could evict them. Yeah, I don't know if they have like tenant rights, but you can't kill them. But yeah, that's always the joke of like, fortunately, we've never evicted a person. Well, we've evicted a tenant, but we're not buying buildings, kicking everyone out and renovating them. Fortunately, that's not our business. Maybe it's other people's, but we have had to evict a lot of creatures. So
yeah. Well, so you're essentially buying, like, all the buildings you've bought are vacant, pretty much?
Yeah. Yeah. We've never bought an occupied building.
It's just fascinating. I mean, is there still like a large inventory of these vacant buildings out in this neighborhood, or?
Yeah, it's less and less, and sort of radiates outwards. It started in this like central area, and then sort of like goes in rings out from there. And so there's still opportunity. But yeah, it's striking, I think, throughout the Midwest, especially, that they're just like abandoned. I mean, people just left in 1992 and wasn't touched until 2015 or something. It's really crazy.
That's so weird. Like I didn't even know that really happened. I mean, it's like just people left their houses and abandoned them, and whole neighborhoods. I mean, almost, right?
Yeah, in a lot of places. I mean, you can still see it. And I think Detroit is maybe a more famous example. I mean, I think the case often was they didn't have the money to tear them down. But yeah, in Cincinnati, Indianapolis, a lot of these sort of Midwest cities that are now coming back to life, just buildings abandoned, basically.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity there. I mean, are there other people? Obviously there are, but I mean, are you networking with, are you like in communication with other investors or other people doing similar things in similar cities?
Yeah, and there's some in Cincinnati that we have a good relationship with. There's probably, three main ones that are much larger than us doing very similar work. And then there's a lot of, I would say, smaller than us doing similar work. And so, I think that's a good thing. Maybe it's different in New York or other places, but it's a pretty like positive environment. I think people are trying to help each other out. And then, yeah, people doing similar stuff in other cities. It's always good. Like, I would say preservationists, urbanists, just people that are interested in this sort of like, middle of the country revival that I think is really interesting.
It's fascinating to me. I mean, this is for a lot, I'm hearing this for the first time about Cincinnati and how deep it actually goes there. I asked you about a kind of hard project or a worse project or something like that. But I mean, is there something like one of your best turnarounds or stories where you just had an amazing project or amazing return or whatever it was, just something that just like really, really strikes as a good case study?
Yeah, so I still am sort of amazed with the first project that we figured it out, that we got it done. The construction timeline was decent, the budget was decent, and I look at photos. I'm like, like we did a very good job on the first project, and some of that, is certainly luck, but yeah, I'm grateful for it. But yeah, so anyways, even the numbers on that. So bought for 5,000.
Wait, sorry, say that again. You bought a property for $5,000.
Yeah, 2,000 square foot building in 2014. With no roof, with major masonry work, but.
But still, you can buy a piece of real estate for $5,000.
Yeah, in like a major metro downtown area. It's pretty wild. Yeah. So yeah, but then invested basically $250,000 into it and then sold it 2 years later for $350,000. So yeah, and then that was exclusive of tax credits, which total were about $100,000. So yeah, that first project did very well. We could have held it. It's always a question of like, okay, do you hold? Do you wait it out? I mean, we would have done better if we held it until 2021. But
right, you never know. You never know. You never know.
Yeah. So that one was a home run, and yeah, I think we were very fortunate that was the case. Buying at the right time and construction probably at the right time and all that.
Sure. And I mean, just that type of project. Now, are these all multifamily properties or are they commercial or mixed use properties? Because I know a lot of downtowns have a lot of like mixed use type buildings where you have retail on the ground floor and some residential units on the top floor.
Yeah, so they're all multifamily buildings, 3 units, now up to 30 units per building. And occasionally they have retail. We have one retail tenant right now, a gelato shop. But yeah, it's all apartment buildings and occasionally there's like ground floor retail.
Very interesting. I mean, essentially you're like revitalizing this neighborhood. So there has to be commercial spaces there as well. I mean, did the commercial spaces abandon when the residents abandoned as well? So,
oh yeah. Yeah. And the one where the gelato shop is, I think when there were fits of trying to revitalize in, late 90s and then early 2000s, they'll try to do the retail space first. So that one had like some plank flooring. I think people had spent 10 years trying to just do the retail space and they couldn't figure it out or make it work. But yeah, so the retail spaces have been vacated as long as the apartments. And, it's always interesting tracking the history of that. You can see all the people that lived in the building, all their, their profession and the mason and the brewer and all that. And even the retail spaces of like, it was a cafe, it was a record store, it was, all this, you can see the 20 tenants that were there from, 1860 on. So that's always cool. But yeah, they were vacant and now that's cool to see too now, in this case, a gelato shop, which is doing well, I think.
That's cool. And hopefully we'll continue to revitalize and bring more people to the neighborhood, which will require more, kind of commercial space to be there as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the power of good retail is very powerful. Just people feel better and draws people to the neighborhood and economic benefits. So
that's awesome.
Good when it works out.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's just been fascinating talking to you, John. But I want to transition to what we call now the final 4. These are 4 questions I ask all my guests. First question: what's the worst job you ever had?
Yeah, so for a brief period early in building the company, I worked at Yard House, which is like a Darden restaurant. Same as I think Olive Garden and Red Lobster and all that. And it's not that it was that terrible, but just that sort of like corporate restaurant environment, I think is pretty counter to my personality. So that's up there, I think. Other one might be like public pool lifeguard. That's a pretty
public pool. Yeah, those are hard ones. Both of those. Oh, wow. Okay. Second question: what's a book you've read that's given you a paradigm shift?
Yeah, so I think How to Win Friends and Influence People, maybe that's, known to everyone, but I read it, I think, a year ago. And I think the underlying principle is like, you're just dealing with human psychology when you're interacting with other people, employees or whoever. And so, people don't think they're wrong. Everyone thinks they're doing a good job. Everyone thinks they should be making more money. And so I think the basic rule of that book is like, just be kind to people and just try to work like within their psychology, and sort of blame and anger and all that just is not effective.
It's such a powerful book. I mean, it's such a fundamental, I would say, for anyone in business and life, just really fundamental. So if you haven't checked it out yet, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. Definitely a keeper. Third question, what's a skill or talent that you would like to learn?
Yeah, so I've always wanted to learn piano, and I think that could still be a possibility. I think the only other one is, I took Spanish for like 7 years growing up, and I'd like to be, fluent in that. And I think it's, in my brain somewhere. So I just need to do it.
That's so fascinating. Once again, our theory has been, really just come to fruition once again. I mean, it's incredible that I asked this question, and it used to be about 50% of the time, but now it's slowly moving in the upward trajectory of like 60 to 70% of everyone who comes on the show says either a new language or a musical instrument. It's just fascinating to me. I mean, there's obviously the outliers. It's not everyone, but I don't know. It's fascinating to me.
That's interesting. I wonder what's the other, like if you had to group the remaining 40%.
The other are random. I would say if I had to group them, they would be kind of grouped in some sort of physical activity, like a sport or something like that. Like a few people said surfing, or some sort of like technical skill. But, you definitely have random, we've had 350 episodes or so. So we've had random, things like someone said they wanted to learn how to, to sew, these are great things to learn, skills, talent. You can say anything. It's just fascinating to me how it all comes back to the music and language. So we'll end it off. We'll keep that thinking about that. And maybe I'll go ask Twitter what they think about that statistic. But fourth and final question, what does success mean to you?
Yeah, I think something I saw recently is like being able to provide the things to the people you love, which I think at first level is probably my family, my parents, now my wife. And so, I think just sort of being able to, for sure, ensure no financial pain. I think that's the main thing. And then beyond that, sort of like financial joy, I would say. And I think that's really all that matters.
Awesome. Love that definition. And finally, where can our listeners find you or reach out to you if they want to?
Yeah, well, as we're talking about, Twitter's the place to be. So yeah, Twitter, it's just my full name, including middle initial, John J. Blatchford on Twitter. Yeah, fairly active there. And I think I've probably responded to every DM someone sent me, every message. So I'm available there. But yeah, Twitter's the place to be.
Awesome. Well, you definitely responded to this DM to come on the podcast. I'm grateful to you for doing that, because this has been great. Really learned a lot, and good to hear what you're up to.
Thanks, Yana. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
My pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you guys for joining and listening all the way to the end once again. Remember, until next time, the best advice comes only when you ask. Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn, send me a DM, a connection request, Yona Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.